Hello, and welcome to the Bigger Than Us podcast. I'm your host, Raj Daniels, and today I'd like to welcome Julia Kumari Drapkin to the show. Julia is the CEO and founder of iSeeChange.org, dedicated to connecting communities to each other and their changing environment. Julia created iSeeChange after over a decade reporting natural disasters and climate change science across the globe and in her own backyard on the Gulf Coast. She currently serves on the board of the National Federation of Community Broadcasters and is a consultant for the think tank Resources for the Future and NASA. Prior to journalism, Julia did research, anthropology, and archaeology for over 7 years in Latin America, where she geeked out on Mayan farmers' almanacs. Julia, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. It's a beautiful day in New Orleans, Louisiana.
We had a lot of rain this past weekend.
Yeah, there's been some big fronts coming in, but it's been wildly warm for the Southeast, actually. We're having a lot of our community flagging early signs of early spring.
I know, these trees are confused.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not good. It's January to have spring is even a few weeks early can really make the difference for the growing season. We've seen that pattern over and over and over again. When you get an early spring, the trees and the grass start drinking a little early. Things start to dry out. Things to get a little hotter. We might be in for a big heat season or a drought season here in the Southeast.
And the bugs don't go away either.
No, but we have year-round mosquitoes here, so
oh wow,
it's part of living in the swamp.
So, Julia, I like to start the show off with something interesting about my guest that many people might not be aware of you. So, if you please, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Oh, things that people wouldn't know about me from my bio, or
Yep.
I'm an Olympic wedding dancer. That needs to be an Olympic sport, and I would win it. I was in a soul band in college, and very much miss doing music. But I do live in a musical town, so I get to breathe it, if you will.
Tell me more about the Olympic wedding dancing.
Oh, Olympic wedding dancing. Well, every wedding there are the dancers who make everyone else dance and, get the room kind of electrified. And frankly, if it was an Olympic sport, I would be a gold medalist.
Have you ever had the pleasure of attending Indian weddings?
I have. I have attended Sri Lankan weddings, 1 or 2 Indian weddings. Yes, I can hold my own in various cultural settings with the Olympic wedding dancing. Yes.
Well, if you nominate it, I'll vote for it. How about that?
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. It's a slow, steady movement. But there's other movements we got to start. So, got to pick your battles.
But it sounds like a fun one. So let's just hope. So, Julia, can you share a little bit about your current endeavor that you're working on?
Sure. I run a company, and our signature project is called iSeeChange. It is a digital platform where community members upload their stories and collect data, really, really detailed, block by block, local information about how climate change is impacting their daily life. And with stories, combined with data, we have used community stories and data to improve adaptation, infrastructure design. We've created data sets that are more accurate than many of the hypothetical data models used by engineers, insurers, and cities to help make our communities more resilient. And more importantly, these community stories represent the heart and the voice of individual residents, which is sincerely and deeply lacking. Whether it's in your community or my community, this is happening across the world. We're seeing the need to listen deeply to how people are experiencing unprecedented weather stresses to understand how we need to adapt and prepare for our future.
So can you give an example of some of the data and some of the stories?
Sure. We have been doing this since 2012, and we have had community members predict flash droughts months before the USDA declares an emergency, wildfire seasons 7 months in advance of emergencies, West Nile virus months before there was a national epidemic. And more specifically, we've been doing a lot of work on urban heat and urban flooding to really inform adaptation and infrastructure design. Our most well-known recent project is actually here in New Orleans, where we have community members tracking flooding, urban flooding. They're taking pictures, they're telling us stories about how they're impacted, how their daily lives are impacted, and then they're also taking rain measurements. And when we combine all of that data together, we've used it to better plan infrastructure designs, particularly these new green infrastructure designs, the ability for cities to absorb water and retain it and hold it, rather than try and handle it by flushing it out through storm drains. So we've quadrupled the amount of data that is typically collected in a public meeting, which is the worst way to to get community impact. It's the worst way to get community input. Any kind of public meeting really is predicated on people having the time to go. And when it comes to climate change, the people who are most impacted are often the least resourced in both time and, money. And so going to a public meeting at night, on a weeknight, or on a weekend is really a big ask and an unfair ask. And you're missing out on really providing the public, the whole public, the people who are most impacted by these events, with the opportunity to share their story, to make sure that the public money is being spent in ways that truly fix the problem. So we flagged areas where the models weren't quite showing that flooding was happening at the level that we were seeing it in real events, and that projects need to maybe be moved, or different areas of the project have been emphasized. We've seen this, and we've done this across 2 multi-million-dollar HUD-funded infrastructure projects, and saved up to $300,000 in redesign fees.
Wow, that's quite significant. So how does an individual interact with your platform?
Right. It's as easy as any of your traditional social media. You log in, you create a user account, you select your location. If we are active with specific investigations in your neighborhood or your city, you'll see specific prompts that we're working on a specific project. But otherwise, you can just log in and participate. We have users across 118 countries using iSeeChange to document all kinds of different weather events, whether it's early spring, which we're seeing right now, heat events, flood events, different kinds of bugs that people are seeing, things that are unusual, air quality, wildfires in Australia. You can set your feed to global, and you'll see stories from all around the world. And there's certain kinds of investigations that we're adding, data inputs, and we're syncing the platform to new kinds of features. We're using AI. We're going to be changing our weather feeds and doing very detailed kind of dialogues with community members about how they're experiencing these events over time.
So you have both native iOS and Android applications, is that correct?
That's right. You can use it on your computer. You can use it on your phone as a web app. You can use it with our native apps in iOS or Android.
And how are you getting the word out?
Yeah, we need our users to actually, our users are our best microphone. So if you come to use us and know us and love us, we've had people use us for years on end now. Since our start, we have members of our original community still with us. And we have been doing word of mouth, frankly. We're starting to bring on more larger partners. We've been working with science museums lately. The Museum of Boston, the Science Museum in Boston is one of our partners. We're working with the city of Miami next year, or actually this year. It's 2020 already. Oh my goodness, it's flying. So we're launching in Miami and Boston some specific pilots. Everywhere we go, people hear about us. They log on and kind of get hooked on just paying attention to the environment. Our social media is not predicated on how many times you log in, how much time you spend. We're not trying to keep you on your phone. We're actually trying to get you to pay attention to your environment and to connect to other people doing the same thing. And it's a different kind of connection and a different kind of user habit that we're trying to cultivate. And it's one that makes you feel good. It's one that can actually make a difference in your community.
I love that idea, and I have an upcoming conversation with the city of Dallas, and I'll be sure to mention your app to them.
Sure. We've been eyeing some urban heat in Dallas. We've definitely been eyeing storm events in Texas. We'd love to work with them.
So, winding the clock back, when did you start this? What was the idea behind it?
Yeah, well, I was never envisioning myself as a tech CEO, that's for sure. I was a climate science reporter, working in public radio, video, television, newspapers. For over a decade, I covered, the Asian tsunami and Hurricane Katrina in the same year. And over, you see the same thing, that the traditional modeling can't get specific enough. It's often ignoring community voices. It's a top-down process, not a bottom-up one. And you'd hear things like, I've lived here my entire life and I've never seen this before. And you hear it enough where you go to a climate scientist and you say, okay, residents in this community have never seen their tomatoes dying or have never seen dust storms. They've never, experienced these events. And the climate scientists would always hedge about it being, quote unquote, climate change. So I was living in Washington, D.C., and it was 2011, and it was another $1 billion disaster year. It was one of the first in a string that we've had since then. And I just, I couldn't help myself. I was hanging out with the science advisors to the president. It's called the Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP. And it was the Obama administration, and it was the office was being led by John Holdren. And I'd hang out with those advisors, and I'd say, what's the holdup, Team Holdren? Mm-hmm. Chop, chop. Why can't we get adaptation passed through Congress? It's not a question of climate change so much as the people are really suffering. And they'd say, well, I can't go to a congressman and tell them this is how much climate change costs their district. And that attribution, that ability to get from global space and, historical time and zero in on anyone's experience or zero in on a congressman's district and say, okay, this is how much climate change is impacting you. If we can't do that, then people don't care. It's been 8 years since we started iSeeChange from that moment. And a lot has happened. We've gotten much better with attribution. In fact, a paper that was published just a couple of weeks ago in the journal Nature Climate Change revealed that, in fact, since 2012, you can't find a single day on planet Earth that has not been impacted by climate change.
That's amazing.
And so we were right the whole time when we started. And, and it's really comes down to that very simple truth, is that people, non-scientists, are experts in their daily lives. And they are much smarter than anyone gives them credit for. And when we include their stories, perspectives, knowledge, and expertise in the adaptation process, in the infrastructure design process, in this change process, then the results are so much better. So much better.
As you were speaking, it reminded me of a phrase or a quote that I've heard that says, none of us is smarter than all of us.
That's right. I think that's right. I do. And, when people say, well, how many posts do you need to, what's the statistics? What's the math? And you're like, I've seen designs change with one post. It's been verified by the data or verified by their neighbors. When we all kind of piece it together collectively, this puzzle, we can do it. It is, collective knowledge is one of the greatest assets of the 21st century. And truly it is probably what we need to take on this challenge, which is unique in the human experience. We've never faced anything like this before. We've never been asked to do anything on such a collective level. It almost feels like some sort of test, and we probably have the tools, but do we have the will?
I like the view of the test. And, so you started back in 2011, 2012. A lot of times people see a problem or a situation and they don't take action. And one of the things I like to drill down on this show is along the lines of Simon Sinek, the why behind. So why did you decide to, forego opportunity cost to make this commitment to, launching iSeeChange?
That's a great question. There's a lot of different whys, if you will. I think that we all kind of pivot into why in different stages. Some people have the one why, and others kind of look and see in hindsight all the whys that land you here and now. So if I go back and say, okay, how did I land here? Why did I choose this path? Which is so not easy. I'm a woman of color in the South doing a tech startup on climate change. So there's like nothing easy about that choice. However, I grew up on a barrier island in the Gulf of Mexico. And I know fundamentally that my home, the place that I think about as my happiest place, fundamentally is in trouble and won't be there for the next generation in the way that I would want it to be. And then as a journalist coming to this place, but before that, I was actually an anthropologist. I was a research anthropologist, and I did anthropology even in high school. And one of the first things that they teach you is that the land creates the culture, creates the people. And when you take that view into any newspaper headline, and you think about what historians are going to say about this time and place and all the political upheavals, you realize that climate change is the everything story. It is this invisible hand that has been guiding us for decades now. And if you pull it out and make it more visible, then we can make better decisions and we can see it and understand how we're being influenced and potentially make smarter choices. You can't unsee it once you see it. Its fingerprints are everywhere, whether it's in the immigration stories, whether it's in kind of the way we are politically, quote unquote, dividing ourselves, xenophobia. When we have fewer resources, we start to behave in different ways. And the land changing creates the people, creates the culture. We're kind of in a scenario where there won't be a period of stability. We're going into a period of forever change, and and it's going to be a while before it stops. Potentially not in my lifetime, and I want people to be able to understand their place in it.
So, looking back on your why, and so which island you said in the Gulf Coast? Which barrier island? I'm not familiar with that area.
It's America's favorite beach, apparently, Clearwater Beach, Florida. So it's right outside of Tampa, St. Pete, Clearwater, the Bay Area, not the San Francisco Bay, but the Florida Bay Area. Mm-hmm.
How is that island doing right now?
Oh, it's thriving. It's bustling. It's got more people than ever. My parents left because the traffic was so bad. They've started really advertising it as, the beach in America to go to with family and whatnot. It is beautiful. It's actually, I've traveled all around the world, and it's still the most beautiful beach in the world to me.
So your why goes back to your childhood, which is beautiful.
Oh, absolutely. And to the no-name storm that flooded our house in the middle of the night in 1992 with no warning. When you have the Gulf of Mexico in your living room, you really don't forget it. We were rescued by the National Guard, the whole thing. It's called a no-name storm. So, and this is happening much more often now. We're seeing people flood in ways that they have never seen before during average afternoon rainstorms. And there's something different when you live in Hurricane Alley, which as we do, and I've grown up in the Gulf of Mexico, which can often feel like the bowling alley of disasters, right? It's going to be Houston, it's going to be us, it's going to be Tampa, it's going to be New Orleans. You never know, right? But at least there's a little bit of warning. You prepare, you have a few days to maybe get ready. You get your go bag, you leave, you shelter in place. But these other events are just happening very suddenly with absolutely no warning. And it's really stressful. Here in New Orleans, we've had a spate of these very intense rainstorms that have flooded areas of the city that hadn't flooded since Katrina. And people are very distressed. It's resurfacing trauma that people haven't had in a long time, and causing people to really think about life here.
I have a friend, very good family friend, who lost their home last October in the tornadoes we had here in Dallas.
Mm.
And I was speaking to her a few days ago, and we had another tornado warning come through here. I think it was about a week ago.
Yeah.
And she was talking about her children, and there's almost like a PTSD effect that
Mhm.
they're suffering, what they're going through. And while you were mentioning that, it kind of makes me think about individuals that have, suffered loss through these storms. And when they hear the warnings or when they see the clouds or hear about the weather changing, they probably fear some kind of or feel some kind of PTSD themselves.
Absolutely. Trauma is a big deal in this particular area, whether it's an extreme one-off event or whether it's just that kind of recurrent trauma. We are flagging that on our team, the iSeeChange team, as a big focus for us in 2020, 2021, because, anecdotally, people tell us they feel better using iSeeChange, that they are able to organize the chaos that is otherwise just this intangible threat, right? Climate change feels like this big, invisible, yet menacing threat, and people can't really get their brains on it. But storytelling is actually one of the most fundamental ways that the human brain organizes information, organizes time, organizes experience, and it is a healing act. And what we try to do is encourage people to share their story over and over and over again so that they can understand in how they're being impacted on a daily basis or yearly basis, and to break climate change down into parts that they can tangibly see and then start to solve. And with climate trauma, we have a lot of youth who are expressing very distressing, um, signals to their parents and their teachers around climate change as they learn about it. And it's something that we really want to engage with. We have a lot of classrooms. We don't really target this, kids to use iSeeChange, but it's a very iSeeChange has become a very popular classroom activity for what they call citizen science. So the idea of collecting data as a citizen that can be useful to researchers. And we've, with so many kids and teachers using us, we've started to, hear again that the kids are feeling better about climate change using our tools, and we do encourage people to do that. But yeah, these extreme events, we had a tornado hit just a few houses down from my house, and I remember hearing it and running with my kid into the bathroom. It's these that's what you're supposed to do. That you do what you can. You try and stay weather aware. But me being particularly preparing our kids for this stuff is really where my job as CEO of iSeeChange and my job as a mom really collide. It's something that really is really important to me.
I really like the idea of enjoying children. A couple of different reasons. I mean, first of all, I have young ones too, and they're the ones that are outside and digging around the most, and they can almost be your front line in some of the changes that they're seeing. And number two, like you mentioned, the ability to storytell and engage and involve their peers and create communities around it. I think that's a fantastic opportunity for iSeeChange.
Yeah, it is, and something we need to think. We need more resources to dedicate to. We have been kind of targeting adults as our users because when it comes to decision making around making a community safer, like actually having the impact that we want, that's really where we've been throwing a lot of our focus and efforts. But the longer term impact with working with kids is so important. And there's also a great opportunity to connect kids to different generations, because it's the elders of your community who have the most important knowledge about how that community has changed over time. And unfortunately, change is happening so rapidly that our notion of what is normal is also changing quite quickly. The human brain, I guess social scientists have done a few studies where they've looked at how we normalize things, how we normalize extreme weather, and specifically. And the research suggests that we normalize extreme events like, this flooding now happens all the time, or it's just, 80 degrees in January, and that's just how it is. That process takes about 2 to 8 years, and that's nothing, right? That's really fast. So we're really adaptive in terms of normalizing these experiences, but that actually is so dangerous because that makes us frogs in a boiling pot. We just normalize all these things and we're just adapting to them well. But when you look at the bigger picture, really, it's a dangerous track to be on.
That is really interesting. Normalization. I need to look that up because I feel like that applies in so many other areas of life too.
Oh, definitely. As a species, that's our adaptive capacity is our greatest asset. But like all assets, they have sharp edges and trade-offs.
So going back to something you said earlier, I'm a former tech CEO, and I know some of the challenges I had while creating my software platform. I also had a native Android and iOS app. What are some of the challenges you're facing with iSeeChange right now that perhaps our audience can help with?
Oh, that's really lovely to ask. Well, for the longest time, just getting funded was really challenging. Nobody really cared about climate change social media. And, it was, I'd do demos or pitch contests or whatnot, and I'd be competing against a sunglass company or like a beer company. And people would be like, it's like watching a nun on stage, trying to get people to be their better themselves, But I think that this year has been a game changer. I think that people are really, and unfortunately it's 2020, right? We've really lost a lot of time in terms of our ability to make headway on the problem. But I think we're getting a lot more attention. People are really zeroing in on climate change as an economic game changer, as the most disruptive force since technology itself started to change our economy. So we've been accepted into a TechStars program in Amsterdam this spring. So we'll be going there and doing our. Thank you. Yeah. So we're finally, this is like the 18th time that we've applied or something like that. I could say that story, like we've applied 18 times to this foundation or that accelerator, and suddenly this year we're getting into everything. So it seems like we're getting a lot more momentum. We're going to do our first round, I believe, for 2021. Like to date, we really have bootstrapped ourselves, just using foundations as our angel investors so that we haven't had to take any equity. But for us to grow at the rate that we need to, I think we will start to look for investments. We're looking for patient capital, smart advisors. It's challenging to compete against Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, not just in terms of like shouting, hey, your data, that story, that photo, that could be better used. It's more important if you share it with us. It's also just people feeling overwhelmed by the space. I think that there's a point in which people are kind of finally saying, enough is enough with Facebook, or enough is enough with Twitter. We're trying to present an option to people that your traditional social media post is actually so much more important and so much more valuable if you do it with us for this, to try and make your community a better place. So just getting the word out is a big part of it. We don't have any advertising budgets. We don't have anyone on staff who does that at all. And ironically, journalists are not the best at marketing. Good storytellers, but not good at marketing.
One of the things that we do here is we connect people in projects. So I'll be sure to get your project out in front of people that we know.
That'd be great.
Especially here in the Dallas ecosystem, if there are any VCs or other sources of funding that you're looking for here, please feel free to share that with me offline, and I'll see what I can do to help you over here.
Absolutely, yeah, and good advisors too. We're developing our AI. We're having to compete with Stanford graduates who make $300K on graduation, which is just because they know how to spell the word AI. That's just crazy. So we're looking for talented developers, talented advisors as well. And yeah, we appreciate the help.
I'll put the word out. So before we go, one of the last questions I like to ask is, if you could share some advice with the audience, what would it be?
Well, the audience, your every audience is different, right? So we're talking with investors and right.
We have an investment community that listens. We have a development community, and then we have just people that are generally interested in, I'm going to call it the broader renewable and sustainable sectors.
Yeah, it's I guess my advice is this. We have every ability to change the system. We do. We have it. It's just a decision. It's a decision to hold your ground on your values and what you know is the right thing to do and the right way to make money. It's possible and it's necessary, because if we don't make a change, a systemic change, then we are really going to hurt bad. We're going to hurt bad a little bit already, but if we don't make significant changes, we're going to hurt a lot more. So it's the right, smart decision. It takes commitment. I think I'm an endurance runner, and I think iSeeChange is a testament to endurance. We never gave up on knowing how important this kind of information really is. And I think for investors with clean tech, with renewables, with changing, our economic systems to account for carbon, it really is possible. It just, you need to hold the ground. You need to stay focused. It's not a shiny new object. It's a long game, but a game that we have to win.
So I really appreciate the advice of make the decision. I'm going to take the liberty of pulling something from your playbook that I kind of read between the lines. When you saw something happening, you made a decision, then you decided to take action also, and then you stayed committed.
Oh, absolutely. But action, I mean, as a journalist, action is a word that I took a really long time to come around on. And I really, I'm not an activist. I don't consider iSeeChange to be an activist space, but the word action or having impact was something that I shied away from for a long time, because my discipline, the traditional discipline of science journalism or journalism at large, is never supposed to take action. It's supposed to, communicate all sides of a story, quote unquote. But when you really see that that's not how reality works, you start to realize that you need to be able to shed the labels or shed the rules for journalism aren't working. And so I created my own form of climate journalism. And I still think of it, iSeeChange in that way, even though people are calling us a civic tech or, startup or, social media platform, whatever. It's my way of saying, actually, we can do this. We can tell stories. We can collect information, and we can make better decisions in a totally new way. And yeah, it means breaking some rules.
But you just said do this, and I think the fact that you're doing is that action, and so I applaud you for doing so. I come across a lot of people who have an idea or see something perhaps that they don't agree with, regardless of what side of the aisle they're on or what their particular activism is, but they don't take action on it. So I think you seeing the challenge and then picking it up and moving forward with it absolutely lends to taking action.
Yeah, and shedding labels. People say, "Oh, I'm not an impact investor." Like, who cares? Like, invest with your values.
Absolutely.
Right. So I don't really have a label anymore. We're doing iSeeChange, and that's it. And it is its own thing.
And one last thing I'd like to add is that, that piece about anthropology that you mentioned earlier regarding land, people, and culture. I remember reading a book by Jared Diamond many years ago.
Mm-hmm. Guns, Germs, and Steel. Yeah,
correct.
Totally, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I took away so many lessons from that, but I honestly can tell you that in that tome of a book, I don't think he ever said it as succinctly as land, people, and culture. But putting my mind around that, and even from an architect standpoint, they say that function follows form, right? So very similar.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot to take away from the land shaping how we eventually behave and then developing our culture. So I really appreciate that nugget too. It was very helpful.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It makes the world make sense.
It really does. It really does.
Yeah.
So Julia, I really appreciate your time today, and I look forward to seeing the progress of iSeeChange. We'll check back in with you in a few months. Are there any last words you have?
No, just keep in touch. It's going to be a big year, 2020 for us. And yeah, absolutely. Great talking with you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Julia.
Take care. Bye.